Yay, we are live now. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Golden Goddess Affirmations live podcast recording. I am Trixie Ann, aka the Thoughtful Beast, and I'm here with Khudejha today to talk about coping with traumatic stress after a loved one self-harms, which is a very important and difficult topic. So before we start, Khudejha, could you please introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Khudejha Asghar. I am a researcher and practitioner. I generally work on gender-based violence and violence against children in humanitarian contexts, and have been doing that for about a decade now. And then also enjoy doing fun stuff on the side, like hanging out with Trixie and the AAPI crew in San Diego. So
Yeah. I'm sad that you're not in San Diego anymore, but I'm very excited for you. Very, very
I,
excited for you.
traded like sunny and 75 for like cold, rainy, and like like hail, rain, windstorms. It's been great.
Oh my gosh. Okay, it's fine. You're doing what you love, and so it's all good. It just happened so fast. That's why I'm like, "Wow, Khadijah." Like, I remember you're like, "Oh, I might move to the UK," which was, like, what, like, the other week, and then you're like, "Oh, I'm in the UK and I got a job," and it was like, "Well, you really meant you don't know when because it just happened," which is
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah, no, it's funny because it's like migrant life, right? Of just like understanding, I think, what a lot of our parents' generation had to do when they were moving, or
Oh.
but then just figuring it on the fly, which is like, yeah, the visa might come, and then it might come within a certain span of time, or it might take forever,
Ooh.
and then yeah, you're supposed to get other documents, and then they might come, or it might take forever, and so it's been this like interesting thing of being like, it might happen, I don't know, hopefully it
You're like,
happens,
"But I'm here."
but I'm
You're
here.
like, "I'm here and I have a job, so it needs to happen."
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, that's crazy and awesome and probably a talk for another day because that's very interesting. But let's go on to the affirmation you chose. Would you please read it out for us?
Yes. It's I only preserve traditions that bring joy, not traditions that keep people from it.
Yeah. And let us know, why did you choose that affirmation card?
Yeah. So I think there's so many ways we can think about traditions, and there's so many things that are fun, that can be fun, that are cultural, but then there's also things that can be really damaging. And so I think, especially in South Asian culture, there's this tradition of what Hassan Minhaj has sort of wrote a whole skit about, right? Which is "Lo kya kenge," which means like, "What will other people say?" or "What will the people
Mm,
say?" And with that, I think has come a lot of shame and silence around a lot of things, particularly around mental health. And so there's been, I think for me, it's as someone who works on GBV now and works on violence against children, being able to work on mental health and talk about mental health and have spaces about health and wellness, and also mental illness and disorder is really important. And it's something that's been so hidden in so many of our communities. And I think to me, it's having had so many experiences too with mental health or illness being hidden, or how that has affected sort of both my life and then the lives of people around me, people I love and care about.
yeah, that's so interesting. Honestly, like, until you said it when we were talking about this podcast before, I didn't think about basically the tradition of silence, um, and how that is a thing. Like, that's a tradition we hold. It has its own words that we tell each other, like,
Yeah.
don't, or and like it has words, and it has, again, because it's about silence, it has words and it has silence that's passed down.
Yeah.
And then the shame and the guilt and how, like, that's a tradition, even if we don't see it as one. It's like, yeah, no, that's something definitely we're like, ha, handing down the ladder. um, which, like you said, can be really damaging. Silence, secrets, shame, guilt can be really damaging. Um, so let's get down to the story you wanted to share with us
Yeah.
today. Yeah.
Um, yeah. And so it actually revolves a lot around the idea of mental illness and around shame. And so growing up, my essentially when I was a teenager, I have multiple siblings who I love dearly, and one of them, we were in a pretty tough situation in terms of just our family. Like we were living in an abusive household with an uncle, and my older sibling had tried pretty hard to get us help. And as a teenager, that's it's a really difficult thing to do because people don't believe teenagers, right?
Yeah.
And so there was just a quite a long period in which she had been trying to find different ways of getting us support, getting us help, sort of raising the alarm, essentially that we weren't in a situation that was like healthy, and she was having a really hard time getting help and support, and so we and alongside it then was also having her own challenges with mental health, and adolescence as a period actually where a lot of disorders start to become more apparent, and
Mm.
so you can develop disorders at different points in your life course. But yeah, early adolescence, like 10 to 14, can be sometimes where things start to show up, and or symptoms start to show up. And so we were in a situation where we didn't really have necessarily a lot of adults to go to for help or support. Um, and then over time, she and has given me also permission to sort of share this. So I'll just share a few things around it. But she had what we would call now like suicidal ideation, and so there were a couple of times in which I had sort of caught her while she was sort of planning a strategy, maybe, or trying to yeah, like essentially planning a strategy, or sort of in maybe an early stage of trying to enact a strategy.
Mhm.
And so I myself was also a teenager, and I didn't quite know what to do. And this was now it was over 15 years ago, and so there's a lot more resources now, but back then we didn't have too much. It was like the early days of the internet, and people didn't really talk about things like suicide. And so um, I think for me, there was one moment essentially where she had been asking us for help, or she'd been asking for help, and I got called into our guidance counselor's office, and I was supposed to go to hockey practice. I had like my giant hockey bag, and I just remember being pissed. Like I was just like, I don't want to talk about this shit, like. And
Yeah.
so the guidance counselor wanted to talk to me, and I lied. It's like everything's fine.
Mm.
Um, and I think what I didn't realize at that time, and it's something that I've thought about now and sort of sat with since, is that you know by lying, I was then also contributing to the way that my sister was being gaslit, right?
Mhm.
And sort of the way that she was being ignored, or when essentially when my uncle was saying, well, she's lying, or she's not telling the truth, she's being dramatic, she's being this, she's being whatever. Um, that then I was sort of backing him up without having realized it, right? And,
Yeah.
um, yeah, and so I think we had, there was one time where my sibling tried to commit suicide, and, had left the house to do it, and then essentially had left the house and then had come back, and, that was, I think it was sort of the epitome of this idea of like silence, and as a family value, I think, and as a cultural value when it comes to this. Because I had, the long story short is that I called my uncle, and he didn't want me to call an ambulance because he didn't want the neighbors to see. And so I had to essentially just wait for him to come so that we could take her in the car to the ER. Um, and I can't tell you how long it took, because that's also kinda how trauma works. I can't tell you how long it was, but it just felt like hours. It felt like we were waiting forever, for him to arrive so that we could go. And,
Yeah.
um, and so I think for me, that is something that looking back at it now, like, all those seconds matter. Every second matters in a situation like that. And so, um it was putting my sibling's life at risk. It was to sort of hide things from the neighbors. Like, it was valuing the opinion of people we didn't even really know, like, it was just people in our neighborhood over her life. And, um, that's something that I think has just sat with me for quite a long time around, like, well, what is the price of something like low area? Like, what is the price of an appearance? And like, is that worth my sibling's life? No, to me, it's not. And so that's something that I think that's a tradition that I don't want to keep. Like this idea that an appearance would be more important than the people that I love and care about.
Yeah, that's awful. Like, what an awful thing you went through, like, you all went through. Do and what a thing to carry for such a long time.
Yeah. It's
Wow.
yeah. I
Mm,
think there's like there's a piece around forgiveness. And I think especially as someone now who works with adolescents, and just
mhm.
understanding that adolescents are kids, and it's
Yeah,
something that we often like adultify them, right? In ways in society. But the truth is they're kids and they need support and they need help and they need guidance, and people make lots of mistakes as adolescents. And so I think one thing for me has been trying to like has been actually just I think forgiving myself for those times where I felt like I didn't show up in the way that I wanted to.
huh.
Um, and and understanding that like we were all kids, And so yeah.
Yeah, like, yes, you were a you were a child, and you're right, like, so many people I don't I always feel bad how, like, teenagers get treated. Like, I always feel so bad about it because it's just like they can't win.
Yeah.
And literally they're going through puberty, and we know, like, their hormones are out of whack because 'cause they're growing. And instead of being sensitive to that and mindful about that, and then teaching them right, instead of teaching them coping strategies and, like, mental health to help them deal with their hormones actually affecting not just their bodies, but their minds and how they understand things, we just kind of throw it in their fucking faces and just be like, "Excuse it," like your uncle did, like, "You're being dramatic. You're being dramatic." Like, we excuse it and we throw it back at them like there's something wrong with them, when we all literally know this is a part of them growing, and again, because we're not there are mental health strategies, right? Like, you can help your teenager figure this out because this is a real thing that's happening to them, like, no matter if you think it's dramatic or whatever, to them, obviously, it's very important. Like, obviously, it was very, very important. And like, there's just so much guidance. Like, that's like the crappy part. Like you said, like, it's weird because we do like make teenagers an adult, and at the same time, we slap them down like like their words don't matter, and we treat them like little tiny children. Who's by the way, little tiny children, they should matter too, and what they think should matter too. But and then yeah, like the adultifying of just like them expecting us I'm not a teenager anymore, expecting them to know, to know, like no explanation, but you should know better, you should act better, or like you're not a little kid anymore, so you just need to be able to handle this. Um,
Yeah.
and that's so rough. Can I
Yeah.
yeah. Can I ask you about, like can I ask you about how the forgiveness is going? And, like, what you how what maybe that looked like for you or what it looks like?
Yeah. I think, so, we were, uh, siblings, like, yeah, I mean, we were three siblings, and it's a sort of wild and crazy situation, and, even in the best like, there's a lot of things, right? There's a lot of ways that, siblings can, right, get under each other's skin, right? And
Mhm.
it's, and you spend all this time together, and so there's things about each other, and then, sometimes you poke at each other or things like that, and sometimes you're not really aware of how much that can hurt, right? Like, the ways that we poke at each other, but I think for us, I think at that time, I think at the time at which that attempt happened, it was, I think, tough. Like, it was just, I think, a tough time for the 3 of us, like, my siblings and I all together, and I think there was, I think now, what I can look at now is at it with is, like, a full understanding um, of what depression is, right? And, like, what
Yeah.
and an understanding now of suicide and, like, why that happens, and I think that then I didn't necessarily have that, but I think one of the things I felt at the time was, like, abandonment, right? It was
Yeah.
this idea that, like, "Why would you leave us?"
Yeah.
And I think that that's something that, it's I think for me, it's been coming to that realization of, like, it's not about that for someone. Like, it's just not about that. It's, like, it like, you can know how much you love someone else, but they may not be able to always, like, feel that from you or understand that from you. And that isn't personal. It's not personal.
Mm.
It doesn't mean that they don't love you. It doesn't mean anything except that it's hard for them to feel that, to feel it coming from you, right? And so I think for me, there's been, I think, a few things. I think one is like, sorry. I think one is also like, it's like fighting the urge to act like something doesn't matter when it
Yeah.
does, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
so it's like fighting the urge to sort of shut down and be like, well, this person's gonna leave me, so I'm gonna, like, go on the defense, right? Like, it's sort of saying, like,
Yeah.
"No, I love this person, and they matter to me, and their life really matters to me." And I think that, um, we've had periods of being sort of distant and not distant over the years, and, in large part because of our childhoods, and so, um, but I think for me, like, I think, I had yeah, I think I think not great about a lot of stuff from when we were kids, and my right before I moved here, actually, my sibling texted me, and she said essentially texted me to apologize for something that happened when we were kids. And it was something that I didn't even remember happening. Like, she, like, said that I did this thing and, like, it wasn't right that I did it, and, like, "I wanna support you and, like, you're moving and, like, your journey, like, this new journey of yours," and I was like, "I don't even remember that." And I think it was, like, this moment I think for me, I felt this moment of just, like, "Oh, all these things that I am holding on to," like, my siblings also holding on to things and feeling bad about them, and, like, I actually don't want her to feel bad about anything.
Yeah.
Like, I think to me, it was like, like, we were in this really wild situation, and we were kids, and, like, I just want my sibling to have a good life, and I don't want my sibling to spend time worrying about what she feels like she did wrong back then, you know? Like,
Dude.
I just want her to enjoy her life now, and I think that
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. That again, back to that silence, right? That
Yeah.
tradition of silence and holding it all in and then, like, being here now with your sister and being like, "Wow, like, you coulda let that go a long time ago because I didn't even remember." And then also, like, how it affects your relationships when you hold on to that thing, when you feel bad, right? It makes it I I can't speak for everyone. I feel like it seems normal that if you feel bad about doing things, if you feel bad about the past, it kind of turns into avoidance, right? It's like,
Yeah.
how can we strengthen these relationships if we're trying to avoid like dealing with things that happen, even if we're like, it's not even like you want to keep it a secret, it's just like you just don't know how to approach it.
Yeah.
Um, and and yeah, and which is why talking about mental health is important because I could definitely see, everything that happened with your sister becoming, like, just a trauma that your family just takes to the grave, and, like, no one talked about it, and everyone just, like, whatevered it, and became whoever they were because of it, but not acknowledging any part that yeah, partially why we're here, or a big part maybe even of why we're here is because of what happened a long time ago.
Yeah.
And that's so hard, and then so I'm so glad that, you and your sister are, like, having a better relationship now. I know we didn't talk about it here so much, but when we talked about before, you're actually, like, building a better relationship with her.
Yeah. And I think it's something that, I think it takes time, right? Like, I think
Mhm.
it's really easy to be like, everything is super healed. And it's like, that's not really the case all the time, right? It's like, it takes time to sort of rebuild. Um, and it takes also just an understanding of, I think, like an appreciation kind of like what is there, if that makes sense. And I think for me, it's like, well, like, I love my sister and I'm glad that she's here to live her life. And I don't
Mhm.
need my sister to be perfect. And I think I think there's a freedom in being able to be two people who are just like imperfectly existing, if that
Yeah.
makes sense. And so I think maybe that like, I think maybe not having even the facade of perfection, I think is really freeing. And I think that, even if it's just, I guess, between us, if that makes sense. Like, I think that, yeah, I don't know if that makes sense, but even if it's just between us, that it's like, well, we're allowed to exist and not be perfect, and
Yeah.
I have, my siblings seen me at moments in which I probably have not been my best, probably been my worst, um, and I've also seen my sibling in moments that were really tough and really difficult, and, I think that there's something about that of just being able to witness and acknowledge and, um, yeah, witness and acknowledge and also, like, know what I think have clarity maybe on, like, the important thing. And so, because there's always a universe and, that could have ended so differently that
Yeah.
and, um, and I think for me, one of the things I realized was yeah, I realized about a year ago actually, because I went to visit my sister and, got to hang out with her and her daughter, and we were, like, watching Moana and just sort of doing, like, kid things, and, um I realized that, like, there was a part of me that was stuck back there, you know,
Yeah.
back in that moment, and that it had been over a decade, and my sister has this life like, she has so many things have happened in her life, so many things have happened in my life, and so I think there was a moment for me in which we were together in which it felt like I was coming back into the present, if that makes sense, and
Yeah.
being able to sort of see and say, "Well, look, here's my sister now, and here is
Yeah.
this, like, adorable little human who is her human, and, who's her kid, and, you know, there's a universe in which this didn't exist, but this
Yeah.
does exist, and that's just this, like, beautiful miracle, right? And I think to being able to, like, see that and really see that, if that makes sense, and acknowledge like, understand it, um, I think for me has also been, I think, part of the healing part, because I think it's been part of understanding I'm, like, trying to think of how to say this. It's, I think it's part of, like, getting unstuck from like, unfrozen from that moment and that attempt, and, um, that doesn't mean that, mental health is a journey, and so it's not that everything's hunky dory again, right?
Yeah.
For anyone, it's not that it's hunky dory,
Yeah.
and everyone has ups and downs, and that's kind of how mental health is that there can be cycles or times where things are better and they feel better, and then there's cycles or times where things don't feel as good, and, but I think that being able to sort of understand that, like, we're not in that moment anymore. We're in a different moment now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, on trauma, right?
Yeah.
Things like PTSD, the way we do get stuck in the past or how we see it's so easy to hold on to how you see other people in those
Yeah.
big moments, especially growing up, especially if there was, like, a lot of trauma around it, a lot of intensity, like, I'm so glad you had that moment where, like, it shot you back to the present because some people don't get that, even in those moments when when the present and the little baby as the future is in front of
Yeah.
them. Like, some people don't realize and they can't get out of the past, and that sucks. Oh, and I don't know. I just wanna say thank you for sharing because it's hard. That's so hard, and having all those years, and then luckily having built your own life, which honestly is very beautiful because obviously everything that happened to you as a child and the things that happened to your sister led you to this path where you're literally helping youth with their mental health, like, so that's beautiful and wonderful because you didn't have to do that. That also could have gone another way. So I just wanted to point it out because it's wonderful because it's just like it's a I feel like testament is too strong. It's a testament. It's proof that that you can move on, that you, even if you didn't know it, were somehow dealing and coping with it healthily, trying to make the most of your future, and then things are coming together, and then they come together, and now, like, you have the capacity, you have the education, you have the understanding and compassion to be able to look back and forgive yourself and understand why things happen so that you can help prevent it happening to other people.
Yeah.
Like, that what a gift.
It's true. And I think, yeah, I think, something we've done some work in one of the projects I work on around, like accountability, right? And part of
Mhm.
accountability and being accountable it's not just apologies, but it's like, what are you going to do differently? Like, how are you going to change what you're doing?
Yeah.
And I think for me, I think owe this to this experience with my sibling in a way was the the mistake that I made at that point was not to stand in solidarity with her in the truth, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's something that to me has been important now and important as an adult is that if however uncomfortable it is, right, however difficult something is not to let someone else stand alone when they're speaking the truth, right? Is to
Yeah.
stand in solidarity with them um and also to speak up about what the truth is, right? And I think that it's not always an easy thing to do, but what I think that what I saw all those years ago was, in part it's like, well, what's the consequence of allowing someone to stand alone in a moment
Yeah.
where they are fighting really hard for everyone? And I think that and so, yeah, it is a privilege, I think, to be able to work on it now. And I think for me, especially, I think getting to work on youth and work on things like mental health, like work with on adolescents, work on family violence. Like I think it's important to me to, prevent like family violence, and it's also important to me that there's supports for people that work, and that people are believed when they're coming forward. And so I think yeah, it's a lot of it's been informed by, life.
Yeah.
um, but also, yeah, it's been like there's been just so many like transformative experiences and learning experiences for me, and I've gotten to learn from so many people. Um, and I think so it's a tough topic, but it's also just like really a privilege to be able to work on something you're passionate about.
Yeah. Can I ask you about, like, kind of work? And I
Yeah.
don't know if specifically, like, this question does apply to you, but I'm curious to know what interventions or modes or just when you're helping the families you're helping, what is actually helpful to get them talking to each other and get at the truth?
So that's a complicated question. Okay, so
Sorry.
there's people have different opinions on there's a bunch of research on things that largely don't work. And then there's sort of different people approach this in different ways. And so I'll sort of start with a lot of the people who work on families where they're working with parents and kids.
Mhm.
There's a method, there's an intervention in the it's been, I think, evaluated in the US called parent-child interaction therapy. And so part of that is you're working with each person. So you're working with often people come in because on the surface there's an issue with the child, right? And then when you dig in and you figure out what's going on, there's actually something going on with the family that's affecting the child. And so it part of that strategy is to work with the adults and the kids. And so it's addressing issues that the adults are having, essentially, that are affecting the kids and affecting how they interact with the kids.
Mhm.
And so they've done it, I think they've done some evaluations on it and it works. It's just not used. It could be used more, I think, in the US. Like it's not necessarily the default mechanism that people go to in the US when they're working with families. Um, so that's part of that is then it's group and individual, right? And then if we're
Mhm.
thinking about this from like adults, like intimate partners, for example, like relationships, there's different theories around that when we're talking about situations that are abusive. It's things like family therapy or couples therapy actually can be harmful if, especially if the therapist isn't well trained to recognize signs of abuse, because it can keep someone it can essentially keep someone in a relationship that they might be safer leaving. And so especially among a lot of feminist groups, things like couples therapy in abusive situations are actually not something that people recommend.
Mm.
In a lot of places, like in a lot of countries, there's been this question of like, well, if there aren't, if there's like limited practical avenues for divorce, which means it has to be legal and also it has to be something that's not so stigmatizing that it would essentially prevent someone from being able to live a life after that. Like, um, there's been some discussions and questions around, well, how do we work with women? Like, how do we help women who are in relationships where they're not necessarily going to leave those relationships, or help people who are in relationships where they're not going to leave those relationships? Um, but they're experiencing abuse or they're experiencing, right, like a level of dysfunction and toxicity that's harmful to them. And so there is a lot of debate around that, and there's like couples interventions and whether or not those are effective or not. But when it comes to parents and kids, there's a lot of strategies with working with parents that can improve parent-child relationships, and then can also uh, reduce to some degree like use of violence against kids. And a big part of it is, sorry, I'm just rambling now, but like a big part of it
Yeah.
um, is that actually a lot of people don't necessarily understand like what's developmentally appropriate for kids. And
Oh,
so when we're talking about that like that adultification, it's like sometimes people are assuming intentions of children that are just like not appropriate for their age range. And so like a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old, the idea that like the kid, like a child is doing something on purpose
oh,
to
like to piss you
disrespect
off?
you. Yeah,
Yeah.
like that idea. It's
They're
like,
doing
no,
it
like
on purpose.
yeah, and it's
They
like, well,
know.
they know, yeah, and it's like, no, they don't really, like, they're learning about boundaries for the first time, and so they're learning about these things, and then they're sort of testing them because they don't understand what they are, right? And so it's a part of it's part of a child's development to do that, right? And so it's like if you're setting consistent rules and you're setting like if you have structure and a level of predictability where the child can clearly understand actions and consequences, then you can actually help them sort of develop, right? Like develop
Yeah.
their understanding of and improve their cognitive abilities. But in a lot of situations, that's not the case, right? It's like you might get a punishment one time and then you get a different punishment. And then like there's all sorts of
Yeah.
things that people do and they're inconsistent. And then
Okay, I
there's
have a
also research and
question then.
yeah, go for it.
I have a question for you now personally.
Yeah.
Again, because now you know all these things that you know. Like, looking back at your childhood and, like, how you were being raised, like, can I ask, like, what do you understand better now? Or, let's put it this way. I guess this is me asking you to give out advice. Um, what advice do you have for
Yeah.
family members and friends who then think that their child, their niece, their friend might be having really big problems, like, emotionally,
Yeah.
like with,
I would y
what do you do? Especially, I mean, I know,
yeah.
and we said this too, like, especially with when your kids, and you can only know and do so much. But what would you say to people who are having an inkling like, "Hey, I think someone's actually really struggling, and I don't know what to do?"
Yeah. I think, you know, creating like regular spaces for healthy conversation about difficulties is really important. And so that's part of undoing that tradition of like silence and shame. It's like not burying things under the rug, right? Like not sort of like pushing them away and saying like, "Oh, I'm seeing this thing and it's making me uncomfortable because I don't know what to do about it, so I'm gonna ignore it." Like, that is an instinct so many people have, and I think it's sort of stopping yourself and saying, "Well, actually, I'm not gonna ignore it," right? I'm gonna even if I'm feeling uncomfortable in this moment because I don't know what to do, I am still going to try to make that space and make sure that my child understands that they can talk to me, right? And if they're having a hard day or if they're having a hard time, that, you know, part of it isn't just about it's not about brushing it away. Actually, like acknowledging and being able to sit with that is really, really important, and being able to witness it is important. And then, um, because then it it d it stops people from having to hide it, right? Because a lot of things, especially when it comes to mental health, you know, people feel like they have to hide what's going on. And I think that that's, and so essentially you have to then counteract that, right? And it's sort of letting your child know, or letting people in your family know that actually it's okay to talk about certain things. It's okay to say that, you know, you've been having a really hard time or this and that. And it's okay to be sad about certain things. Like I think that yeah, it's I mean, it's like being it's like the Asian way, right? It's like a lot of the times it's like, well, you toughen up and carry on, like, right? It's like
Yeah,
you just suck it up. You just suck it up
yeah.
and keep moving. And it's like it's and I think and sometimes people have to do that. That's a survival mechanism. I think um yeah, it can be a survival mechanism to have to do that, but part of safety and being in a safe place is that you don't have to run from your feelings, and you don't have to bury them, and you don't have to hide them, and that you're making space for people to share them, and then also making space to figure out, you know, well, what do we want to do something about this, or like how can we help, right? How can we um and letting I think also letting your child come up with solutions first, right? Like asking them what they would want um, is also important because, you know, empowerment in making change, empowerment in like someone's life and having a feeling of autonomy is really important. And especially for kids, it can help them feel like, well, they have, you know, some charge or control of their life in a world that can often feel really out of control.
Oh my god. I'm, like, listening to you talk, and I'm like, "The Asian way is all the opposite of this," and how that's so right? Like, because it's just, like, these intervention I'm all I'm thinking is, like, all these interventions exist and stuff like that, but it really is, like, against a lot of, like, Asian cultures to do that, and like you said, going back to suck it up and move on is definitely a survival tactic, like, of many, like, like, of many immigrants, whether or not they came over as refugees or just they're coming over literally for a better life, and it's so unfortunate
Yeah.
that, like, I mean, mental health, I still think is a very new concept for, like, most people, um, and, like, where we are, and I think in America and for content, it's, like, out there, but, like, the actual, like, use of it in, like, normal day lives, like, it still really hasn't been discussed, like, because like, talk about using that, I feel bad for, like, our immigrant parents and stuff, or people who are, like, of the mindset of, "You need to suck it up and move on," because it's just, like, unfortunately, that's probably the only way they know how to deal with things, and what's really unfortunate then is that at some point, hopefully, I know not everyone gets to this point, because honestly, if you're in poverty, your mental health is gonna be bad, there's no way, There's no way. Um, but once you get out of that, like the transitions out of that, like from survival to just living to thriving, like isn't just about money. And the fact that they don't think about that, like that's really hard. Like I know, like at least like my parents, they show love through um structure and money, like really resources, being able to have things for their children and stuff. Cause that's, that is kind of the American dream, really is like capitalism, unfortunately. But then it's like really missing the parts of like, we don't have to be in the survivor mindset anymore. Cause when you're in that, like that is such a different mindset. And then to bring that mindset to like your children when they're not in the same situation as you is also like a mind fuck to the kids. Like it's a mind fuck to me. Like it's like, people talk about like that generational gap and stuff. And it's like, yeah, it's really there and we should address it. But I don't even think we have to talk about it then. And we have to make it
Yeah.
okay for the kids to be able to talk about it. And we have to make it okay for like the parents, like that it's okay that they didn't know. And it's not like, you ruined my life kind of thing. You know what I mean? Like it, that's how we were all socialized. And it's just like
Yeah.
moving forward past that is not an easy feat. It takes a lot. That and it takes a lot because people don't even realize that they need to do that. That they, like I talk to my friends about this a lot. Like, like a lot of our parents, grandparents, and stuff like that, they never got to reach self-actualization because they were busy like surviving. They didn't get to be their own full person and like find out who they really were. And then therefore, like, how are they supposed to foster that in us?
Yeah. Well, I think that's part of the cycle, right? Is like so many parents have given up their right? They gave up whatever their dream or aspiration was in one way to ensure like economic security for right, like our generation.
Mhm.
And that's not everyone, but like I think there's a lot of that, right? Of like having sacrificed, having right, having done so many things, taken so many jobs or things like that. And I think then it can create this guilt in us of just like,
Yeah.
right? It's like this, there's this guilt of like, well, all the things that were sacrificed, like, what am I doing with my life? How am I like doing the parents proud? And a lot of that is it deters actually so many people from the arts, right? Like it's like you
Yeah.
feel like you have to get a stable career and this and that. But I think the other piece of that is like, there can be so many ways to fulfill a dream. And I think, is it Alice Rocket, like, In Search of My Mother's Garden? Where I'm wondering if I'm thinking of the right I think it is. It's like, I think I'm thinking of the right essay, but, it's talking about creativity and arts and how actually, like, a garden is a form like, cultivating a garden is a form of creativity and is a form of artistic expression in a lot of ways, and so that, there's this, like, I mean, my parents aren't still alive, but, like, most people's right are, and so, like, there's still an opportunity to realize a dream that someone may have thought they had given up, and I think
Yeah.
maybe that's yeah, that's, like, part of the I think it's part of, like, undoing that, is, like, undoing that way of doing things, undoing that survivor mode is sort of saying, "Well, but my life's not over yet," right? Like,
Yeah.
it's not over yet. So it's like people do things all the time. People do things in their 80s, like new things for the first time. And
Yeah.
that's we often feel like we've like run out of time to do something new or do something different or build a new skill. And it's just not that's not true either, right? Um there's so many things that you can learn to do at any point. You just have to start.
Yeah, and then you just have to know, like, that's why it's so, like, right, because with all that surviving and all that stuff and without, if you
Yeah.
have the mindset of not learning, again, like with your family's
Yeah.
story, like with this particular story, like, we saw the consequence of that. The consequence of, "No, these are just the way things are. We're gonna stop learning. We're not really gonna look and listen to this younger generation." And, like, that has consequences, and, like,
Mhm.
we get it. Like, you don't get it. Like, yes, people don't get it, and it's part of society, unfortunately, but like this is why we have to talk about it and change it. Because like
Yeah.
how like that like that must stunt you so much if you come over to a new land and reside yourself to like, this is my life now and this is it. And like with that
Yeah.
mentality, because I have to survive here now, but with that mentality, again, like we said, just like it's going to miss all this different stuff, not just for your children if you have them, but like even for you and how you treat other people.
Yeah.
Like
'Cause
I feel,
it really yeah. Go ahead.
yeah, I was just gonna say, because it's just like, how can empathy grow there?
Yeah. And I think that's a key thing, right? Is, when it comes to thinking about, like, sort of moving from surviving to thriving is actually it's really difficult to process anything until you're in a place where you're actually safe. And so,
Mm,
like, sometimes what happens to people, right, is like you like, something happens and you just tunnel mode it and you get through it, you compartmentalize it really extremely, and then people hit a point where they just can't do that anymore. Like, it stops working as a strategy,
yeah,
and part of that is, like, it's really hard to then unpack anything, and it's really hard to then rewire, right, and sort of change the way you're doing something until you're in a place where you're safer. And so people often have this experience of like, well, I'm safe now, so everything should be fine. It's like, no, it's not fine. Because you gotta, there's all this stuff that happened that you haven't really dealt with. And so, but that is a thing of like the survivor mode and having to just get through it. It really does, it can really strip down empathy, right? And it can sort of, and part of the reason is like people don't, it's I think for me, I think it's like the scarcity mentality thing, right? It's the
mhm,
idea that like there's not enough. And so when you're feeling like there's not enough, um, then that's fear. It creates fear. And when you have
mhm,
fear, then it's really hard. Like it's really hard then to engage in joy. It's really hard to feel safe. And so part of undoing things, right? And it's also with the family is like there's so many the culture of fear can be so present in so many families, right? And it's part
yeah,
of it like sits alongside silence, it sits alongside shame. And so having empathy and like building joy is an intentional practice, right? Like sort of trying to do that as a family is important, especially when like we're working in humanitarian settings, like especially when there's so much going on that's really scary, like finding ways to still have joy and still engage in that and like sort of it's a way of like feeling your own humanity, and it's like
yeah,
essential to survival. um and it's yeah, and it's fleeting too is the thing is
yeah.
um yeah, it's like yeah. Like, I don't know if you've ever felt this, but it's like, "Oh, okay, everything's gonna be fine. I'm just gonna get past this thing, and then everything's gonna be fine, and then I'm gonna be happy." And then you're like, "Oh, no."
Yeah, nope, it didn't work, slash maybe another thing came along, slash maybe I made another thing come along, or I'm making another thing that is a thing that came along, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, dude, like, yeah, 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 it's really hard. Oh god. Yeah, thank you for hitting the nail on the head. That yeah, that feeling is super there, and then, like, because you get into this, like, running hamster wheel where nothing is enough, and everything's always gonna be coming at you, and, like,
Yeah.
but really sometimes, I mean, not that life is relentless, but you know what I mean? But, like, there's always gonna be a reason to not focus on, like, your mental health, and to not focus on your own
Yeah.
humanity and empathy. There's always gonna be a reason, and some of those reasons are gonna be hella good reasons, but then again, there are consequences to that. Not just, like, as a people, but, like, in our own families and in our own relationships. Can I ask you one more
Yeah.
question? And so this is gonna be a hard
Yeah.
question because it's more personal. Um, what would you ask Khadijah? say to okay, that's too emotional. I was gonna be like, say to younger Khudejha if she were there as a teenager, but like yes, but no. But like what would you say like now to teens, like I don't want to say
Yeah.
simple advice because there's no simple advice, but like what would you say to them if they were coping with, having a family member self-harm? What would you say to them to like to help or like what to do next? I don't even do see I already feel hopeless in this situation. But yeah, what would you
Yeah.
say? What would you say to a
I think
teen?
yeah, no, that's a good question. I think if I was gonna go back to younger me, I think there's a few different things. I think would first one would be that, like, this person's like, it's important to let the people in your life that you love know that you love them, I think is the first thing, is just, like, leading with love is really important, and trying to do that as much as possible is really important even when it's hard. I think the other thing is that I think would be that, you are a teenager and you're figuring it out, and so the there's there's things that you can do, and there's a whole piece of this that you are not equipped for because you are a teenager and you are also a kid. And, um, ensuring that someone that you love, like helping them have the space to get all the support and help they need, which includes you, but is not only you.
Yeah.
It's bigger than that, and it has to be bigger than that, um, is so important. And so you're there as part of the team, and this is a team thing. It's a thing that you all do together. And that's all you can do. Um, but I think the third thing would be, you know, don't hide this thing. If that
Yeah.
makes sense. It's like something's happening. Like if I could go back to younger me before that happened, but in the earlier moments
Yeah.
and say, like, you're afraid that something bad is gonna happen and that this person that you love is gonna do something bad to themselves and they need help and support, and don't hide it because you're covering it up, because that's what we all did, is we covered for each other a lot. But
Yeah.
this person needs real help and they need real support, and you alone can't give them that. They, there's just, and they deserve real support. And they deserve to have the support of somebody who can really make sure that they are getting to the tools that they understand, what's going on with themselves, with their own body, with their own mind. And that's really important. And like, they deserve that. They deserve that chance. They deserve that chance to have the tools. They deserve that chance to understand themselves. They deserve that chance to have all the support that they should have. And you can help them get that. But, you alone as a teenager can't be that. And
Yeah.
that's okay. You don't have to be that. But you can be part of the team, you know, and And so I think, yeah, for any young person, I think that's the thing, is you can be part of the team. It's not a we're not living life solo here.
Yeah.
We live life together. And yeah.
That was beautiful. Yay. No, that's really good. I'm so glad that you said that. That's important because that shame and guilt of thinking it's just you is crippling. Like that can be crippling when you just think, especially as a kid, that it's all on you. So thank you for saying that.
Yeah.
Thank you for having such a compassionate answer to your past self and to youth now. Um, before we leave, is there anything else that you want to say or do you want to share? I mean, I don't know if you want to share about like, hey, I'm Khadijah and you can find me at da, da, da. This is definitely usually our shameless like plug time, but yeah, you could actually share whatever else you want to share.
Yeah. I think like I think maybe the only thing I would share is that I know yeah, we're talking about self-harming and that that's like a tough topic um and so just if anyone is listening that's had experience with that or thought about it, just that like understanding that you're not alone and that you're not the only person that's like struggled with it, and also there's no shame in it. And that it's sorry. um but yeah, there's no shame in it, you know, and I think part of being able to talk about it and being able to stop hiding things is that people are allowed to just exist fully and not have to be afraid of any part of themselves. Um, and that we don't have to be afraid of any part of each other either. And so that's, yeah, that's the world I want. So um, that's the world I'm going to try to show up in. Um, and yeah, just know that like there's someone who loves you and there's someone who cares about you and that you deserve to be here. There was a sign I passed. Actually, I was walking around. I'm in Edinburgh, and there was like a sign, like someone had painted, and it said, "You deserve your room on this planet," or like, and I think that that's very pertinent. Is you know,
Yeah.
like you deserve to be here. You deserve another day. You deserve another chance.
Yeah. Yeah. That's very true. And so I will also say I will ask Khadijah for some links, but in the podcast notes, we'll also have some links to resources for those struggling with self harm and for those who have a family member or any sort of loved one who's dealing. Because, yeah, it's hard. And it's, again, like Khadijah said, it's not something that you can do alone or you're supposed to do alone, especially if you're not a mental health professional. That's definitely not what you're supposed to be doing. Um, so, yeah. So, thank you, Khadijah, so much for being here. This is very like informative. Sorry, we got more into like your work stuff too, but I'm like, I want to know. Well, because like what you do is so cool. What you do is so cool. And honestly, that wealth of knowledge is like amazing. And like it's amazing. And it's yeah, you're very cool. I'm gonna end with that. Khadijah is very cool. Okay. Thank you for
Trixie's
everyone who
way cooler.
I'm not though. Um, um, thank you to everyone who is listening to this on the upload, and thank you to everyone who is listening to this on podcast mode, which will be like in a month or something. So, yeah, thank you to everyone who joined in and who will be tuning in. Have a nice day, everyone.